It's an interesting topic, this, because we've talked a little bit already about the investment side, and particularly that idea of impact investment. We're seeing a huge number. I mean, whenever I'm talking to people in the market, you're seeing an increasing number of Article 9 funds which are specifically focused around impact. And in general, institutional capital, whether that's through listed vehicles or through funds, looking to make an impact with the capital that they're putting to work. And this is one of those areas where that's a big possibility. So I guess let's maybe start with you, Sébastien, if we can. Just in terms of for Cofinimo, how do you see the sort of purpose-driven nature of the investment? How an important part is it for you?
Well, as you said, it's an asset class where we can score high on probably the three dimensions of ESG. So I guess obviously the asset class is very relevant from that point of view. Now that being said, it's not always that clear to roll it out in practice, because Cofinimo is a listed REIT, so unlike Amand, we are not allowed to invest in an operator. So we are just a real estate investor. So although the asset class is quite interesting, there are things that we can definitely do, and then there are dimensions like G and S, where it's probably more interesting to think about what exactly we could do to move things further in society. So to cut a long story short, very interesting asset class from ESG point of view, but the discussion will be quite intricate on what exactly we can do, apart from the E, which is an obvious one, of course.
Well, let's pick that up a little bit. I mean, just in terms of the implementation of it, you mentioned the G side, especially there, which is obviously a big part of being a listed entity as well. So I guess, what are you having to do, and are you trying to get ahead of what's in place? Are you trying to think forward in terms of what, because regulation is obviously moving at quite a pace?
Yeah, look, again, so we're just a real estate investor, so we need to find a place. And one of the questions we asked ourselves is, what could we have done to prevent a catastrophe like Orpea, for instance? Probably the part of the answer is being more present in our houses, controlling more what's going on. But at the same time, we're not an operator, so we need to know exactly what is the limit. And probably one of the answers we have come up with is that nowadays local governments are doing a good effort to be more transparent. And for instance, they are publishing visit reports. And in these visit reports, you can find quite interesting topics, like things that are not going that well in your houses. And we think that the minimum role that we can play is picking up on those and making sure that indeed, when there are remarks, that these are being handled and taken care of. So that's our way to fill in the G part.
Okay, good. And maybe Judith, from your perspective, I guess how important is elements like affordability? Obviously, we have funds set around affordable housing, whole businesses set around that. But how important is affordability, do you think, from your side? And I guess, how are you implementing, the ES and the G in terms of what you're doing?
Well, as a social housing foundation, affordability is very important for us. We have a lot of social houses and also a bit for the mid-range, but especially for the older adults, their income won't increase in the future. So this affordability is very important. Well, in the Netherlands, there is a regulated market, so we are not allowed to ask more rent than 800 euros a month for this segment. That's a case. But then we have to invest. The business case has to be right, so that's a challenge.
Well, that's interesting, because what does that mean in terms of, I guess, the kind of living concepts that you've got to develop?
Yeah.
Because obviously we've heard before, and especially there as well from Michelle, in terms of the demand that there is in the Netherlands. So, how do you work within that budget, I suppose, to be able to create something that does match the demand?
Yes. Well, we focus now more on actually residential concepts, because in the Netherlands it's also the case that the nursing homes will decrease in the future, but the amount of people who need care probably will rise. But we want to try to invest in prevention. So we developed 5 types of living concepts where people live together and they can look after each other. So the needs of care, we hope will decrease.
Okay, good. Graham, it'd be interesting to pick up with you. You're coming obviously from the design side, the architecture side. So in terms of the, investing with purpose part of it, how do you see that from your perspective? Because obviously you're looking at it in terms of how you can make investments in the building have more purpose, what you're doing in terms of creating livability, wellness, those kinds of areas. But I suppose, what's your perspective overall on this part?
As an architect, it's our role or part of our role, to deliver for our clients what they're looking for. And obviously, ESG is important to the clients, and the S component is often raised. And how can we do more? We've heard it in the last 5 minutes. And I think in the design phase, we've got a really good opportunity to make a difference to the S and to highlight elements. I think there's more social added value being delivered than perhaps you already realise. Sometimes just pointing that out. We've heard a lot about it today. We heard about the embassies engaging at street level, and Anya talked a lot about the impact of design on the well-being of the people within it, etc. So I think it's already happening. We're just the architect. You guys decide what the asset is and where it should be and all of those things. We're just here to help you deliver it to a physical form once those difficult decisions have been made. But the opportunity to add positive social impact through that process of delivery and then through the lifespan of the asset once it's created, we can add a lot of value to that. I mean, perhaps we'll have time to go through some of those ideas today.
Well, one of the things that I think is quite interesting from the discussion we've had about staffing levels and those kinds of things is that's a similar discussion that there's been in logistics over the past year, which was suddenly there just weren't people to work in the logistics centres. And so things that had already been happening in Asia 18 months, 2 years before, and we'd learnt about, were then coming to Europe, which was you then needed to have care facilities, you needed to have canteens, you needed to have all of those kinds of things in order to attract staff to it. And I wonder whether there's an element of that. I mean, so far I haven't been in a care home myself in order to work there. But if there's a real challenge with staff, is this an area that perhaps we can also build on? I don't know if you're designing in this area already. Is it something that is beginning to be designed in if we're looking at the UK market? Or is it an opportunity to maybe find something that is more attractive in the building to encourage staff to come?
I think it's an opportunity. I mean, as an architect, we specialise in senior living, but we have other sectors as well. Commercial office environments is something we do a lot of. And you can see in that market, the operators are building in more and more facilities for the people that work there. So not just the users, but we see canteens and gyms and creches and cafe bars and all sorts, wellness rooms, prayer rooms. But we do see, and so when we're designing care homes, our brief and the restrictions we see can be limited to, a small staff room somewhere, a little tea point. We want to attract more people into this sector. we need to make their working conditions better. And there's an opportunity in all of these developments to put in things that both the residents and the staff can use, gyms and wellness spaces, etc. But it all comes down to design. And so working with our client, taking a brief, feeding back, throwing in new ideas is part of the way we can add the S to the party.
Okay, that's good. And does anybody want to take, I mean, obviously measuring the S, much easier to measure the E, for example, but more difficult to measure the purpose, the social side of it, but increasingly a demand for people to be able to measure that. So I guess, are there things that you're doing or you're thinking that you're going to have to do in future in terms to be able to measure that? Because it would be interesting, I think, Ron, as well, to be able to look at developing some benchmarks for the sector around these areas, if we could. So I don't know if anybody wants to pick that up.
Well, we try to measure the well-being of our tenants, and we surveyed the tenants about what they think is well-being for them, and the things like safety, that the building is safe, and that they can meet. There's a space for them to meet with others. These kind of things we can measure ourselves, but we also ask them, what is well-being for you? And we hope in the future to have a list, or also to learn from it, because in our first surveys, things like I want to see something outside was important for the tenants. So we didn't know. So perhaps this can be for us also a good thing.
Okay, good. Amand-Benoît, it'd be interesting to get from you. I mean, you mentioned food being very important, but I guess what are the other areas? You know, when you're looking at that investment in terms of facilities and what people require, that are really going to help, I guess, create that sense of well-being and a positive response?
A lot of different things. Food is obviously a more fun fact, but I mean, it just shows how important little things that we every day do become more and more important when you're at 85, 86, 87, and that you realize that you will live your 18 last months on this planet. So suddenly everything becomes important. And one essential element, and is that what I try to show with the Great Place to Work, is of course the critical element of employees. Employees must be happy to work there, and employees must also put themselves in the shoes of the residents. And that is something that we are trying to work on. We've come across a few initiatives that we find interesting in the not-for-profit sector, a few labs where actually employees play the role of residents, and they are put in a situation where actually every single thing becomes important. Two employees talking to each other when washing and changing a residence, and not even talking to the residents, becomes a huge problem, because you cannot afford not to acknowledge the presence of the residents and talk to the person. And of course, you may have the best employees of the world, but not talking to the resident, even 2 minutes can become a problem. And so we're trying to put the employees, and we will try, we have not done that yet at Anima, but we've come across initiatives in that field, and we will try to put that in place at Anima, where we put the employees in a situation. We have these theaters which are already existing, and where we're trying to train the personnel, but we'll go further and put that in a systematic manner in place. That is important. Satisfaction surveys is important, of course, and from house to house, from place to place, you see very different results, and you have to take action plans. And of course, we have a lot of also volunteers, and I'll say there's some regions in Belgium where you have more volunteers than others, but that is probably cultural. But I think it's a lot of different initiatives that they're trying to put in place, and of course personnel is key in that respect. And the only thing that we realize is, of course, that not only the paycheck is important at the end of the month, and that becomes a more and more critical element, but also the atmosphere, the culture, and the training that they get.
No, that's. I mean, yes. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Can I pick on that one? I think I'd like to make a point on design. I think I fully agree with Graham that design has an influence on many aspects of a nursing home. For instance, on affordability, it's a business of economies of scale. So the larger your facility is, usually the better your cost management is, and the more affordable it is for your residents. So building small scale is great because you feel like you're in a cottage, but it has a price tag that not everybody can afford. But my point is another one. Design also has an influence on social well-being, and what I think is that we see a trend whereby we try to decluster senior living instead of having an isolated facility where we only find older people. Nowadays, there are more and more pilots, and there's even a trend whereby you try to integrate your nursing home with a mix of other type of care services. For instance, assisted living, for instance, ambulatory care, for instance, daycare. And if you mix all those type of care, well, then basically you create a flux of people coming into your facility and bringing your facility a bit alive. I remember a presentation from Bart a couple of presentations ago. He was saying that isolation and loneliness is a big issue. Well, I fully underwrite that. I think there's a very sad statistic that one of our tenants told us that approximately 30% of their residents still have visits every week. Means 70% are completely alone and are hardly visited anymore by their families. So obviously, if you mix different type of cares with a flux of people coming over your facility, well, that creates a thing that is more alive, and I think that clearly increases satisfaction and well-being. So design is really important, I think, in that discussion.
Yeah, no, the survey I mentioned before was by Channels, actually, and I'll send people a link to it, which was around engagement in terms of the living space. And just the top of that, which really surprised me, was loneliness. That was the biggest concern, more than costs, although it was actually loneliness. And I think you're right, Sébastien. There, I think there's a very important role to play. It'd be interesting, Judith, in terms of what you're doing there, particularly with that in mind, and creating a real sense of community, I guess. Yes. What are you doing there? What are some of the initiatives?
Well, we have different initiatives. One really nice concept we developed is a co-living concept, where we already, with people who want to rent in the future, we developed the new building, and we also created different spaces where people can meet, and we asked them where do you want to use them for? So it's not that we in the first place said this must be a meeting space, or actually we thought that a library would be nice, but they didn't want a library. They want a kitchen. So this is a very nice project. And in the future, the tenants themselves, they also are going to take care of the garden, and they have a meeting space. The design of the building is also to promote physical activity. So there's a big staircase when you come in, so you don't need to take the elevator. It is there if you need it, but if you don't, then please take the staircase. So these kind of things is what we do.
Okay, good. I think it'd be interesting just to look at in terms of some of the practices that there are in projects to make them, because we heard a lot about being user-centric, human-centric, those kinds of things. Some of the things that are there that maybe support that. Let's start with you, Graham. I mean, what are you putting into? I mean, obviously, I know you've said that you're getting a brief from there, but what are you putting in to try and create that sense of community, the human-centric, human-level kind of situation there? And obviously, then you've got other areas around ESG which will be smarter buildings, if you like, but.
Yeah, we could talk about ESG all day long and the opportunity with technology and carbon reduction and building differently, etc. But in terms of your question, what are we putting in to make them more human-centric? I think we've heard from a couple of architects today, and we're all singing off the same page. Everybody's saying the same thing. As human beings, we are heavily influenced, and our behaviours are heavily influenced by the environment within which we are. Good design, the colours, the light, everything can change our mood, can change our activity, can change our ability to flourish. So often it's the really small things. Daylight, making sure that we're orientated in the correct way to get daylight into a space can lift somebody's mood immediately. Having a window that opens, having an electrical socket that isn't so far down the wall that you can't bend over to reach it. All these small little things just add value. Judith was mentioning having a staircase more prominent than the lift, encouraging people, making it easy for people to take physical decisions. The list just goes on and on and on, but they are the small details. And we all go into a space and think, oh, this is lovely, or we go into a space that isn't lovely, but you don't know why. It's lovely because it's been well designed.
And I want to drill down a little bit more into some of those aspects, just in terms of the user-centered community side of things, and also, Sébastien, from your point of view, plainly there's going to be an advantage in terms of that you have a better facility, that people want to be in it, it's more attractive for people. But is there a sort of, we had the question earlier, and it's the same thing comes in a lot of asset classes, which is, but who's paying for it? Does it make financial sense? Is it that we simply can't have it without that? It's a non-starter if it doesn't, have that sort of purpose behind it. But I suppose, how do the financials add up for that? Because it is difficult to measure social impact and those kinds of things, but somehow you've got to justify that investment.
Yeah, I think good design is not necessarily more expensive. I fully agree with Graham. I think having the right exposure doesn't cost you a euro more, I guess, right? But the thing is that if you have bad design, well, then basically you're bleeding. We still have in our portfolio a couple of 17th century chateaus. They're very nice for the annual review, the first page, but there's a nightmare for running staff, right? Just a couple of them, all right. But just for the anecdote, really, I think the obsolete buildings, I think we will see an acceleration of obsolescence of badly designed buildings. I think design has so much influence on on the cost of your staff, on the well-being of your residents, on just the way your facility works with the environment in the local community, that having a bad design will simply make it very difficult to run your facility in 10 years' time, probably.
I think I found my perfect client.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. The most expensive thing is bad design. Simple.
How lucky that, in fact, Judith chose to sit over there. Good. Has anybody got any questions, any thoughts that they want to share in terms of what they're doing? Let's just do a quick, yes, go ahead. I'm going to do a quick straw poll, though, first, which is, how important is, let's say, investing with purpose, ESG, in whichever form you're looking at, for your business? Is it in the top 5, hands up? Top 5 of things that are important? Okay, all right, quite interesting. Good, sorry, yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Judith, you're mentioning to invest into prevention, because I think we haven't talked much about that yet, and I would be interested to hear more what kind of measures you're doing in terms of prevention. The other thing is, and who's going to pay for it? You know, because I never heard the word social impact bonds yet, for example, because obviously the issue is when you do preventing, the beneficiary is actually your health insurance, because they actually don't have to pay for something not happening, you know. And so I'd be interested to hear a little bit more on how creativity also comes into financing, because I think we talk about an asset class here, but it sounds still like an old asset class. I think we need financial innovation which actually integrates the social component, not just the economic one. So I'd be really interested to hear a little bit about that.
Well, you're totally right about the benefits. They don't. The revenues, they don't benefit the investor. Not yet, I think. And I think it's we are talking about leadership, so we also need to have the examples where this happens. So we as an organization think that this is really necessary, so we invest in buildings where we think we prevent our tenants to need less care, and I think at the end we can measure. So not yet, but I'm very curious if anyone has examples. But we do see that these silos, you were also talking about it, that we need to break them. And there are some, for example, in the Netherlands, subventions from the government to, for example, make spaces where people can meet in the buildings. You can, as a social housing foundation, we can get these subventions. So, well, it's a start.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Let me know. And Ron, yes.
Well, on the E, you have the green premium and the brown discount. So what's the trigger on the S? So should we educate the valuators to make the social impact visible in the valuation? So maybe the crossover from PropCo to OpCo. So maybe that's a question when you have both on your balance sheet. Will the valuation of your business improve?
I hope. No, not yet. I mean, it's very intangible value. But the thing is, in the long term, where you have happy employees, happy residents, good design, and I think I totally agree with what has been said on that respect. I mean, that will make the difference, and they will get the premium, and the others may get the discount, and maybe that will go faster than one anticipates. The social taxonomy will help. We're not there yet. We don't have it yet, and it doesn't seem to be coming soon. But I think, but it will help, and I think all these elements will come together at some point. So I think we have to make the right bets today, and hope market will recognize the difference.
Okay, good. And I wondered, Michael, it might be interesting just because at your conference that will be coming up in a couple of weeks' time, what I found noticeable and interesting, and if nobody's been to the ARCO conference in the UK, what I found interesting about it was that you actually had residents on a lot of the panels, so massively enthusiastic 90-year-olds. So I'm just interested in terms of that community, purpose-driven side of it. How influential is that, do you think, especially when you're talking to those people who are actually there benefiting from the facilities?
I think in many ways the residents we have are our best marketing colleagues and salespeople, and I think that's really something where I'm sure everyone here who runs certainly senior living or retirement communities would say that sometimes what you need to do is you just need to bring customers into contact with the product, because typically people think it's a care home, I don't want to go, and then they see it in reality, and sometimes they are evangelical about the impact that it brings. Interestingly, I think older people are these days, they're quite interested in the environmental aspect, by the way. So I think older people are quite interested in leaving this world a better place for their grandchildren. That's what we hear, certainly. And we've got 2 members who are building net zero carbon retirement villages. And that's been very, very well received by the older people themselves. And I think that's almost a marketing thing that I don't think the operators were properly realizing when they started on that journey. They were doing it more from a corporate ESG perspective to kind of like, I'm not going to say tick a few boxes, but certainly I think, speak to that agenda. But it's turned into something that's popular with consumers as well. And I think the more people the more voices of consumers we can bring into this, the better.
Great. Yes. I mean, I thought that was very interesting. That's interesting about the sustainability side, because that's something that I've been seeing in terms of that older generation as well. I mean, and interestingly, from a social impact point, my father moved into a specialised senior living, community, living in the local town. He lived in a village, so he had to drive. And actually, lots of people, all the same age, all began to move into it because they didn't want to drive, they didn't want to be in their own house, they didn't want to do that, and are now all having, I have to say, a fantastic time and look much younger, are enjoying themselves much more, are not worried about anything. So there is a real social impact to it. And I remember having conversations about this with people saying, well, it's a bit late because he's kind of 85 and he should really have done this before. But he's now very happily 88 and looks and feels much younger than he did before he went in. So that's positive, and is also on the volunteering point, is volunteering on what he calls a group to help old people. So that's an encouraging side.